Hello, my name is Goey, and welcome to the Vmigo Tabby Cat Retrospective. Since it's been a while, and this is pretty much a sequel to an older video, I'll start with a quick recap. Back in 2021, I made a retrospective on the Vmigo, which is a line of handhelds and consoles released back in 2006. It was advertised as a virtual pet that you could take on the go and plug into the TV if you bought the docking station. The Vmigo has multiple versions. The ones that I covered initially many years ago were the dog versions. As a reminder, these are still far more accessible and easy to find compared to other versions. The Golden Retriever, which was normally bundled with the console, though they also sold it separately, and the Chihuahua version, which never had a console bundle and was an individual release. Each contained different breeds along with one exclusive Dream minigame added to the console or docked version. The Chi version, for example, has the chasing game, whereas the Golden has the jumping or infinite platforming game. Now, aside from the dog versions, two more versions of the Vmigo were made, the Tabby Cat version and the Spider-Man version, that being the only licensed game in this line that isn't a pet simulator, instead being an action beat-em-up game. Both games nowadays, compared to the dog versions, are notoriously difficult to find on the secondhand market. They might possibly be the rarest games out there amongst many at this point, as it took me 3 years to find the Tabby Cat version for sale anywhere online. In fact, for a time, I had given up trying to find this game because of how rare it is. Unlike the Spider-Man version, which has a decent amount of footage online at this point, the Tabby Cat has never had any sort of documentation of how it plays or even snippets of what gameplay is like. It ended up being very elusive, which, not gonna lie, drove me a little crazy. I mentioned in the past I was very curious about this game more than the Spider-Man game, as I remember seeing it in store shelves when I was a lot younger. I was hopeful that maybe eventually someone would, I don't know, dust out their old Vmigo cat and take some footage of it, at least so its existence was reassured, but that never really happened. The only recent mention I could find was a post on TikTok, which sadly was never followed up on. Fortunately though, thanks to a kind source, I was finally able to get my hands on this thing after so long. But it really did take a long time to get here. Was it worth it? For my curiosity, yes, but I'll leave additional final thoughts for the end of the video. With all that being said, if any new people happen to stumble upon this, I would highly suggest watching this video first, as the version I will be covering here has many similarities to the dog versions. Honestly, the best way to describe this version is that it's basically a massive reskin of that game, just with several changes such as new minigames and even some minor quality of life improvements. Hopefully transitioning to that video and then back to this one isn't too jarring. I'm not gonna lie, nowadays I'm a little embarrassed by it, especially because I put on more of a voice acting or character voice for that video. I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do at the time. Okay, let's finally hop over to the Tabby Cat console version. If you haven't gone through the initial setup on the pod, hooking it up to the console will take you through that process first, starting with setting up the date and time, as well as setting up the player name and birthday. You are also asked to pick your favorite color and give it an additional option to set a pattern for the game's UI. A very cute addition in my opinion. Once that is done, you are taken to the cattery instead of the kennel to pick out a kitten. You can choose between the Tabby, Maine Coon, and Persian. Like the dog versions, you start off with 5,200 pet points, with the only options you can afford in the very beginning being the Tabby and the Maine Coon, as the Persian costs 7,000. But again, the breed doesn't change anything about gameplay, it's only really the appearances that are different. I decided to go with the Maine Coon for my first playthrough. After that, you give it a name, it hangs a little bit, and return home to start a new life with your new feline friend. Everything from here on out in terms of gameplay is pretty much the same as the dog versions. From the beginning, you are given a full overview of the iHUD or controls, basically what each action on the D-pad does for both A and B. The A button is primarily for interactions with your cat, accessing toys, as well as to interact with things in the environment. The trick list from the dog version is instead replaced with a song list. So instead of learning tricks, your kitty learns how to sing songs, and it works just about the same as performing tricks. You just have to follow the directions on screen using the D-pad. The actions are also the same for the B button. They are used to navigate through the different in-game locations, access general info such as your cat's needs and overall profile, your entire inventory, and your mailbox. You'll notice that this time around the quests aren't located here like in the dog version, and that's because they can only be obtained by talking to NPCs in the city, which we will get to eventually. The needs you will need to manage remain unchanged. If those go downhill, expect your pet's mood to go down with it as well. Disregarding or neglecting your pet's needs for a period of time will result in them eventually becoming sick, emptying the mood bar entirely. which can only be resolved by taking them to the vet. I like that they made the face on the mood meter resemble a cat's face. It's a really clever touch. The amount of items you can collect in the game appears to be almost the same. This version has an additional 20 items versus the 335 available in the dog versions. They seem to share similar items between each other, such as a lot of the clothes and accessories, for example. There are different toys here that are aesthetically more suited to a cat, but function just about the same as the ones in the dog versions. In terms of places you can access in the house, there's the kitchen and the bedroom. The kitchen is the primary feeding and bathroom spot. Whenever your cat needs to use the toilet, you will need to redirect it to the litter box in order to fill up its bladder need. After about 3 uses, you will need to replace the litter in the litter box in order to use it again. Litter doesn't come free though, unless you go hunting for it in the city, and must be bought in the shop, much like food and water. The bedroom serves as a spot for your cat to sleep and fill up the fatigue stat. That's literally Choco Cat framed on the wall. There is no way that's an original asset. Anyways, you can also access the Dream minigames here, which are Cat Creek Falls and Beanstalk Hustle. Both are survival games that award you with trophies depending on the amount of time you can last without quote-unquote dying, as well as pet points. In Cat Creek Falls, you jump over logs while avoiding vultures and falling into the water while collecting coins. Every so often, these little red lifesavers float by, and unlike the logs, they never fall off the edge. Instead, they float back up after a while, allowing a little bit of time for you to think out your next move or jump. Every 30 seconds that go by, you earn an additional 10 pet points. It's actually kind of challenging. I realized much later on it was possible to scoot a little bit farther to the edge of the log in order to make a complicated jump or to step on them. I didn't think you could because I was worried about falling into the water if I did so, especially when it came to landing on those worn down logs. You can't stand on those for too long, otherwise you drown. Not a bad game though, just repetitive, which shouldn't be surprising. A lot of games on here aren't like that. Beanstalk Hustle reminded me a lot of the jumping game from the Golden Retriever version, except you don't really have worn down platforms to worry about, only getting caught by this ogre, which doesn't really look like an ogre, just a giant. You can land on either these purple platforms or leaves on the beanstalk, and along the way you can collect coins. Once again, for every 30 seconds that go by, you earn an additional 10 pet points. It doesn't control the same way as the platforming game. It feels less fluid and more stiff to control, if that makes sense. Not helped by the fact that the D-pad is also kinda stiff. It's a little annoying to control, and it took me a while to figure out and get used to. And that's pretty much all the Dream minigames in this version, with the most minor improvement being that every time you lose, you don't have to put your pet back to sleep. It'll just take you back to the selection screen if you want to try again or play another game. New dreams also don't pop up even after your cat becomes an adult. Most of the newer games are actually found in the city. So let's take a look at this new world. A big contrast from the dog versions aesthetically, but gameplay is almost exactly the same, just with a couple of new quirks this time around. Here will be the only time you can take full control of your kitty, and instead of digging to find items and do quests, you jump on trees, look under cars, go behind vendor stalls, the trash, ventilators, and jump inside holes or open windows. Every so often you'll come across mice or birds, which can be caught for 10 pet points. You can navigate through the city by walking of course, but you can also climb these ladders or pipes to explore the top of these buildings, and you can jump across them as well. Much like the dog versions, doing these things repeatedly will cause your cat's needs to decline. And if you don't have them vaccinated, expect your cat to get sick much more often. When it's not feeling well, you can't really do any actions unless you take a trip to the vet to make them feel better again. You also have the option to scratch fences and vendor stalls, which will help increase your cat's fun need. As for quests, you can get them by talking to any of these two NPCs named Mikey and Vicky. Mikey mostly hangs around these vendor stalls in the front of your house, while Vicky can be found in the center of the map next to some of the minigame locations and shops. Much like the dog versions, by completing these quests, you can earn different variations of existing items, including new toys and clothes that can't normally be found in the shop, though you can also find them sporadically throughout the map. There's a special category of items referred to as treasures in their descriptions that can only be obtained through these quests. However, those are only collectibles that can never be interacted with. Much of the special items mostly consist of miscellaneous or random things, like an old boot or a framed photo of a helicopter. Interestingly, the dog games have a couple of different special items in their versions. Those Aztec idols are not in this version, for example. However, there's not much that's being missed out on across versions. In this version, it seems you can do quests as much as you want here rather than having to wait around for the next one to pop up in your mailbox. The quest arrow is also enabled by default, so as long as you press A, it'll point you in the direction of where you're supposed to go. Speaking of that, remember the sniffing game from the dog versions? Well, this makes a return, as the same mechanic is utilized from that game to complete quests. So whenever you are super close to the item you are looking for, the color will change from a dark blue to a bright shade of red. And that about does it for quests and what you can find here. So what about the places, and are there any new locations? Well, like I said before, there are some new minigames here, and in terms of services, this and the dog versions share them respectively. You have the store, the vet, the salon, the kennel is now the cattery, and the training school is called the cat school. And all of these have been left pretty much unchanged from the dog versions. So I'm just gonna speedrun these real quick. In the shop, you can buy items essential for care and fun like food and toys. The bet is to restore your cat's health, pay for vaccinations, or in-game advice for about 20 pet points. In the salon, you can buy clothes, pay to groom and increase hygiene, and dress up your cat and take pictures once it becomes an adult. The cattery allows you to buy a new cat, sell one, or select to play with another if you had dropped one off previously, and the cat school allows you to buy and learn new songs, still costing about 150 to 500 pet points, as well as boost one of your cat's needs, of which you are still only allowed to only increase one stat per day. Now let's talk about the games you can play in the city. In the beginning, you will be locked out of 3 of the 6 games as a kitten, those being the singing competition, tank tease, and cat duel. The ability to time travel is still intact though, so you can just skip a few days ahead within the system settings to make your cat instantly become an adult. For those that want to play fair, however, there's a place that you can access called the Factory, where you can play 3 different minigames: Mouse Hunt, Fish Frenzy, and Mechanical Mice. In Mouse Hunt, you're supposed to sneak up behind these little robot mice, all while trying to avoid the others from ratting you out to the dogs. Once the mice snitch on you, there's no way to avoid them. It's a guaranteed loss at that point that you're forced to sit and watch. This was kind of a frustrating game for me actually, again not helped by the fact the D-pad on the controller is stiff. I really tried to get the first place trophy, which requires you to catch about 30 mice, but I could only really achieve second place every time. I don't know, maybe it's just a skill issue, but this sucked for me. Up next is Fish Frenzy. Here you're supposed to catch fish before they fall off the conveyor belt, all while trying to avoid falling off yourself. The only obstacles in your way here are these cube things that look like ice cubes. Along the way, you can also collect coins for some additional pet points. While the game isn't timed, the longer you play, the more pet points you earn. And the way the game ups the difficulty over time is by spawning more of these cubes in your way. Last game in the factory is Mechanical Mice, which is basically just like those generic bubble shooter or tile matching games, except it's very watered down here, since you can physically control where the mice go here, and the longer you play, the more pet points you earn. For these next 3 games, available only as an adult cat, there are a total of 10 levels to complete for each, and unlike the dog versions, you can actually earn money from these, even after you completed them, which is a big improvement. This version overall is a lot more generous with pet points. I remember it was a lot slower to earn them in the dog versions. You had to solely rely on spamming mostly the dream minigames there for money, since the games in the overworld gave you only trophies, and were practically useless to replay afterwards, since there was no payout of any kind. The singing competition is basically the trick competition. I mean, just look at it. You are allowed to compete for the first few levels, then required to learn new songs at the cat school in order to move on to the later ones. Honestly, looking back, DDR probably wasn't the best way to describe this game. It's more like a set of QTEs that you have to finish correctly within the time limit. Tank Tease is basically somewhat of a substitute to the disc catching and swimming game. Here you have to catch as many fish as you can. You can progress to the next level if you catch the required amount of fish. If you stand around on a spot for too long, the fish will notice and swim away. Last but not least is Cat Duel. Now despite the title, you don't actually get into a cat fight. The goal is to scare off the local alley cats. You're supposed to press the button on screen to stop this meter here, which will in turn decrease your opponent's chances of winning. This can go by a lot faster if you hit the flashing target zone. There are a total of 2 rounds for each duel. It's a pretty self-explanatory game, though I will admit I thought I could just ignore the flashing spot on the meter entirely to progress more quickly, especially because it sometimes would flash on the blue zone. I always tried to aim for the red zone, but eventually I learned that wasn't going to be as effective as I thought. And that's pretty much everything the Tabby Cat has to offer. So is it good, bad, meh, and was it worth it? Well, like I said in the beginning, for my curiosity, yes, this was worth it, considering nobody has ever documented it online before. The game, however, is once again not good, not bad, just okay. It's pretty much the same Nintendo's rip-up, which I fully expected coming into this. This whole retrospective, honestly, is just the dog retrospective. It is aesthetically different and does have a couple of different minigames, which helps separate it from the dog versions. But of course, those games are also not entirely original if you think about it. The whole game is not original, really. Despite some of the aforementioned minor improvements, it still retains some of the issues the dog versions have, such as having some slight delays. I'm pretty sure that's the reason I was having issues with games like Beanstalk Hustle and Mouse Hunt. The internal clock on all these games is also busted. I didn't mention this in my dog retrospective, but it can't really be played properly as a pet sim, given some of the issues with the game not catching up with the real world time, and it all does get repetitive after a while. There's a distinct lack of variety, which, again, isn't surprising, especially for a game like this. Despite all of that, however, I am happy that I now own this little piece of history, and that I was able to share it with people. I think what motivated me the most to get my hands on this thing, aside from the fact that it almost became quote-unquote lost media because of the little information available online, was the fact that I grew up with the dog versions when I was little, and I'm not even a cat person. I just like the topic of pet sims, really. It's kinda like this niche that I've become passionate about. For anyone that was dying to see what this version was about, you're welcome. I hope this was informative, and it has put your curiosity to rest like me. I have a blind playthrough of the Tabby on my channel if anyone wants to watch it without any commentary. I will also put up all available footage of the Spider-Man Vmigo in a pinned comment. Considering the rarity of the game, I can't make any promises that I'll ever cover that version, so I'm very sorry if that disappoints anyone. Lastly, if anyone is interested in buying the game, the dog versions are still available for sale, mostly on eBay, new in box or loose. I'm surprised by how many keep popping up for sale mint in their boxes. Again, the cat and Spider-Man games are very rare to come by, but if you do happen to find one out in the wild, expect it to be pretty expensive, especially if it's new in box. At this point, these are pretty much considered vintage items, so be prepared. And that's the end. Thank you for watching. See you around.